Hi everybody, Michel here. Michael Guasco writes that historians have moved away from seeing Indian slavery as a static institution controlled by European demands. Rather, it is a cultural construction arising out of interactions between indigenous peoples and colonists with a set of unique parameters determined by indigenous practices. That fluid side to indigenous captive and slaving practices is what I hope to present here. Brett Rushforth, in Bonds of Alliance, creates for his readers the world of the indigenous slave trade in the Pays d'Anneau, where slavery was a powerful and long-standing tool of diplomacy, well before the arrival of French trappers, traders, and missionaries. At its heart, taking an offering of slaves expanded kin networks, allowed for flexible and malleable alliances. The French had to adapt and accommodate themselves to this culture. In Slavery in Indian Country, Christina Snyder argues that captivity was not static, but adaptable. In one of the more memorable passages I came across, Snyder argues that the opposite of slavery was kinship. From the earlier Mississippian chiefdoms to the new nations of the native South, the Choctaw and Cherokee, the Creek and Chickasaw, the Seminole, the taking of captives functioned to intimidate others, to expand the labor supply, even to confer status. Entire groups could be absorbed through captivity, enhancing the strength of the clan. In Stealing Indian Women, Carl Eckberg describes not only the pre-existing practice of Indian slavery in the Illinois country, but the ethos of tolerance with which the French viewed the racial and ethnic mixing and mingling of French settlements along the Mississippi River's west bank, St. Louis and St. Genevieve, as well as British posts after the 7 Years' War along the east bank, like Kaskaskia or Fort Chartres. The amorphous structure of class, social status, and race allowed for movement not only across the river from one community to another, but out of slavery and into free society, where often the only constant for slave and free was an adherence to Roman Catholicism. Crystal Shevlin's recent book, Anglo-Native Virginia, argues that Indian trade relations played a key role in the economic development of early colonial Virginia. Native peoples of the coastal plain paid annual tribute to the governor in exchange for trade rights, protection, and land. For the tribute Indians, official licenses to trade gave them access to expanded territories and the power to remove their foes from those areas. They became caught up in the commodification of objects and entered willingly into the skin and slave trade, that edgy term favored by Shevlin. Contact between colonists and tribute Indians created a hybrid culture, although the Indians learned that Europeans would never understand the bonds of kinship formed through trade as they understood them, just as the Europeans, if they were to succeed, had to adapt to native trading practices and expectations. In Alan Gallay's The Indian Slave Trade, the practice of Indian slavery acted as a medium of exchange, for slaves were both currency and capital in colonial 17th century South Carolina. The rampant greed and rapaciousness of the officials and traders allowed for a chaotic approach to relations with native peoples. Prior to contact with Europeans, indigenous societies had shifted alliances, restructured confederacies, and enslaved their enemies. They continued to adapt to the ideas, the trade goods, and the diseases Europeans brought with them. Faced with encroachment, dwindling natural resources, and abusive slave trading practices of the English, native peoples continued to restructure their alliances. During the Yamasee War, the Indians fought back, targeting a key source of their misery, the traders. When royal government attempted to establish more predictable oversight of the native population, many of them migrated away from South Carolina, even incorporating with other indigenous groups. In his article, The Power of the Ecotone, Robert Morrissey argues that the Illinois people acted aggressively and opportunistically by moving into the Illinois River Valley. The Illinois people settled in the unique ecological border zone between tall grass prairie and woodland that offered two key advantages. First, the edge effect of the ecotone offered a wide variety of plants and animals, important in supporting the large population of the grand village of the Kaskaskia. Second, the zone offered opportunities for slaving, trading, and bison hunting. The Illinois adapted culturally and environmentally, carving out a place as entrepreneurs and as merchants. They controlled the borderlands between east and west. Native peoples engaged in slaving practices that they adapted from enslavement's original intentions, those of kinship and alliance, to the changing social and economic circumstances of contact and colonization by Europeans. They did that not as victims but as participants, and at times as initiators.